my little black and white printout with my rule of thirds grid on it. I'm going to use this to do a quick drawing. I'm going to speed through it because by now everybody should know how to do a drawing. I'm using a grid because I have to draw from an angle, and it's actually really hard to get proportions right and get a good picture. So since I have to do that and the camera is where my head should be, then we're going to do it this way. Okay, so I'll just fast forward through this in a little bit. Okay, I think that's pretty close to being just blocked in. Okay, that's it. I'm gonna put away the watercolors. This is a number 8 filbert. You can see it's pretty good size. This is what's called a mega brush by Blick, which is, you know, kind of ridiculous. Obviously, house painting brushes are bigger, and house painting brushes are just fine for painting. Some of my favorite brushes are house painting brushes. But when you get into some of these big surfaces, so that I don't get too fussy, particularly when I'm blocking things in, and I want to remind you guys, this is just the initial planning and kind of, it's a sketch. I mean, I've got the first few ideas in here, but this is not the end, right, of that conversation. That needs to be over a tiny bit. So as I set up the paint, what I'm going to be doing is blocking it in. I'll be looking to block it in a little bit better, a little bit more. Okay, so looks like we've got, the bigger the work gets, the higher the camera gets. It's now just above my eye level and I can barely see it. I'm going to have to get like a little step stool or something over here so I can focus and check, but I think you can still see. Okay, and my canvas is, my palette is a mess. I just had a great conversation with John, and I decided I'd just roll with it, that for the purpose of this, what I want to show you is that as I'm blocking things in, it's not a fussy process. I'm not trying to get things perfect. I'm trying to get things close. And in fact, if I get fussy, it's going to be a problem. So all I'm going to do is pick a gray. Okay, and so I had the watercolor from last little sketch I did. So I'm just going to pick a gray. I'm not at all worried about where things are going to ultimately end up. All I want to do is pick a color. And you can see I'm also not working on a white canvas. All I want to do is pretty clearly noodle in the shadow shapes in something that I can work with. So if I go too dark, I don't have a lot of room. So I'm just going with this, and I'm going to just let the color kind of evolve as I work. What I had suggested to John, in fact, I'm only I'm only a little bit concerned about color at all right now. What I'm worried about is value. What I'm interested in is getting things more or less in the right place. So this is just continuing the drawing process. And in fact, the fact that I'm getting more interesting colors for the same price, right, is a good thing, right? Boring is the enemy of a good time. Party, romance, painting, don't bore me. So it's just kind of the cardinal rule. Don't be boring. And so coming up with these first couple of colors, I'm not trying to be loyal to the color families at all. I'm trying to be to get something interesting down there that makes sense to me. And since I'll be working with this, I'm working on this for a while, you know, probably an hour, hour and a half, maybe a little more. I know you guys are anxious to get this information, so I'm anxious to get it to you. And the further back it is in space, the less important it is to me. These forms are placeholders. They mean that there's something going on back there. And so I want to indicate that there's something going on back there. But it's not all that. It's not a big deal. The dark form, and I've already decided to let this dark form just roll off the page. There's a core shadow there. It comes down to about there. It comes up. And then all I'm looking at is, as I get from each edge, which side is darker. If it's, so in this case, it's dark behind this piece of fruit. I'm on an orange, hard to tell, it's in black and white. So it's darker behind that, so I'm using that color to carve out the light on the fruit. And then because it's a little dark over there, I'm going to make sure I indicate where that core shadow is. And there's a darker shadow through there as well. Okay, so again, all I want to do is kind of make up this neutral, I just want something that's interesting. I just don't want to create a boring color. And I know I'm going to have to put several passes because acrylics are so transparent. So I might as well, I'm resigned to it. I'm going to have to put down a couple of passes. So I don't need to be fussy about it. And in fact, the less fussy I am about it, kind of the more confident I feel about it. If I do this while I'm biting my lip and stressing out about it, I'm going to actually stress myself out, which I don't need to do. And I'll show you how easy it is. I mean, actually, it's not difficult. So this area down here is in kind of glancing shadow. The tabletop is where the light is. So good to remind myself. In those various ways that I showed you how to blend paint, one of them was to dry brush, and that means just scrubbing with the brush and letting the marks of the brush create the form on the canvas. So I'm just scrubbing lightly over this surface right there. So there is a edge, so the light's hitting this surface and that. Okay, so I need to mix up a lighter gray. So the darkest area, so the shadow edge on this piece of fruit, which when I turn on the computer and see what the fruit is, it'll end that mystery. So all I'm doing is scrubbing that in very roughly. But I think the darkest part of it is somewhere in there. That's kind of the core shadow. And things are getting a tiny bit dry over here. Then there's a shadow on this side. It's not very dark, so I'm not mixing a very dark color. Doesn't come up quite that high. Comes to about there. Comes over to about there. It's a tiny bit darker down here. Maybe not that dark. If something gets too blue, just add some orange to it. Orange is the antidote for blue. Any of the primaries is the antidote for blue. So I can make a darker, more interesting color there and up there, and go back to the kind of dull color in between. So all I'm paying attention to is hard and soft edges, light and dark transitions, doing all of this with a number 8 filbert without biting my lip at all. And let's see, and I'm interested in, there's a core shadow on that form. Then there's this globe back there that's kind of dark, and it has a job to do. Its job is to silhouette this pot. So the lid of the pot comes something like that. Down, the pot comes something like that, just like on that side. Where all your watercolor practice. There isn't a lost edge there. I just messed up. Messed up a minute ago, but it's not a big deal. I can keep track of one mistake. So the background is crazy important, right? The background is one of the most important things because its job is to push the other objects forward. Now there's also the handle of this, but it's kind of fussy and detaily and not that big a deal. So it'll be easier to paint later than trying to paint around it. So I'm just going to paint through it. And this comes all the way down to, let's see, I didn't draw the top of the block. Let me guess. Somewhere in there. It's the top of the block, I did draw the edge. All that stuff back there, there is noise and nonsense. I think there's an edge somewhere in there, so I kind of overshot it. Again, not that big a deal. Okay, so now I've noodled in some shadows, hard and soft edges. What else do I need? I guess there's a little, I think I might call this Dumbo because this looks like an elephant's trunk to me. Isn't it? Right? In the way that shape of that tip looks like the tip of a trunk. Okay, and then it has a soft transition. Soft transition here, soft transition there, comes all the way over here because there's a reflection off the light block, somewhere where there's a handle. The background gets a little bit darker gray. So right here, the background gets darker. I know that purple is darker than blue, so by throwing a little red in it, I can make it darker without adding black to it, or I can add black to it. It's really your call. And then there's the continent of Africa just disappearing off the page, and I think South America just emerging. That would be too close. I think that's all Atlantic. Okay, all right, I'm gonna let that dry and I'm gonna clean up. I'll just get a paper towel and wipe this up. As long as I don't get the yellow wet, I'm good. But like the blue and the orange, that's a bad thing. The red and the green. Okay, close enough. Let's look. I made a Rorschach test. I see the end of the pandemic, Doc. That's what I see in the Rorschach test. Okay, I'll let that dry. Okay, so that seems to be pretty dry. All right, so all I've done at this point is kind of noodle in the basic dark light pattern. There are a few things I noticed as I was doing it. Like there's kind of a nice S curve to this. I think I got the lower end of it right, but the upper end, it curves a little bit more. And it doesn't come quite to the midline of this bottle. So either I can slide the bottle over a little bit so that they don't line up. But again, what I'm trying to do is avoid, I'm trying to avoid uncomfortable tangents and things lining up. You can see this is a safe distance from the edge, and then the handle breaks it. This is a similar distance, right? But it's not an important part of the composition. This orange is, this block is, so they sit here, and then this falls back behind them and kind of fades out. If you don't like the kind of marks, then don't use a filbert. Filberts will give you sort of a scrubby, soft edge. If you're into precision, then you probably want to use something like an angled shader, which is a great brush. If you're using your watercolor brushes, be sure to clean them out. Acrylic will wreck them. These acrylics are a little thin, so I get that urge. And when we get into glazing, I understand it even more. But you can wreck your brushes. This is kind of a hybrid synthetic brush, so it's good for acrylics, easily cleaned. But remember to dampen your brushes. Don't get them soggy, just damp. And squeeze out any excess. That'll keep the paint from drying too quickly in the brush. All right, and what I'm going to do now, because I want you to see this process, I'm going to make a quick glaze. So it turns out, despite my best intentions, it turns out it's not safe. There's no place to put an iPad in here, so I did a pretty poor printout. Let's see. So the temperature of the shadows on this leans background gray. So I would say that the shadows look a little bit cooler than not. So I'm going to make up just a little bit of a violet. Of course, the phthalo blue just dominates in that conversation. A little bit of yellow ochre that I picked up on my brush is neutralizing that violet a bit. Okay, and what I'm doing is mixing a little bit of your matte medium. I know there were a couple of different brands available to you, so regardless of what brand you got. So I'm getting this, and I'm just gonna use this because I want to make sure that I don't have any of the bare canvas, not just white, but I don't even want the gesso showing through in my shadows. I want them to be more interesting than that. And that means making sure that I've got some coverage on these forms. And since I like to paint from dark to light, some people don't, some people have other preferences. And the other, one of the other big issues, and it is kind of a big deal, don't make too much paint up at a time. Just make a little bit of paint. Like I'm getting a couple of brush strokes out of this, and then I'm having to change the paint. So what I don't want is to be just putting down some massive thing. If you mix up a bunch of a color, then you'll feel like you're obligated to use it. And one, you're not. It's a color. Don't let it be the boss of you. Gail's hair in the studio. Kind of jealous she has hair. Okay, so when you make up a ton of color, you'll feel obligated to use that color, and you shouldn't. So what this glaze does, what any glaze does, is it just makes a thin, transparent, like using a watercolor wash, right? So it's a thin, transparent layer of paint. And it has all the virtues of transparency. It's not too bold. We're going to do some finer glazes. But what I want to do is I want to make sure that I've got values to push against. So things that are a little dark, I'd rather they were a little darker. And you can see I'm using this big clunky brush. I'm not trying to make this perfect by any means. I'm just trying to indicate where things fall into kind of middle values. So again, it's just another way of softening my edges. It was one of the processes we looked at in the little demo that I did about creating blends with acrylics. One of them was to use a glaze medium. So by having a glaze medium, what I can do, like watercolor, I can build up layers, which is cool. And also, since it's acrylic, they'll be permanent. Like that, I won't be able to push them around or be pushed around by them. Okay, so now I'm getting some sense of, now I've got a dark value, the initial stuff that I kind of noodled in. I've got a lighter value, and I'm gonna just add some water here, because the tabletop does have a value to it. And there's fall off over there. There's a value there.
And there.
Okay, so now I've got this, and as that dries, and it will dry quickly because I don't have a slow dry matte medium. I have the regular matte medium, and since it's 80 degrees outside today, the air is pretty dry. So I'm just going to put this back on top of here, so the palette stays wet and the painting dries. And I would say at this point, my underpainting is ready to start thinking about the next step. I do have some corrections to make, so I think maybe I'll start making up my colors and work from the shadow edges in. But now I've got a drawing that's been checked, and it's in pretty decent shape. This would be a good time, by the way, this would be a good time to wipe off, when this dries, be a good time to wipe off any of the grid that still shows. And it's a good reason to do the grid in watercolor. Okay,